Okay.
So good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. How are you? Welcome back to the series of lectures on international relations. The paper I'm doing with you is Introduction to International Relations. And so we are continuing with the very first topic. And the first unit is little, very vast and lot of approaches and lot of theories are there to understand. And that's why today would be the last lecture. We'll sum up last two approaches, what we have to understand within this. Okay, so to give you a quick recap, what we have been doing is so far we have done the realist approach, the idealist approach, the liberal ideas, and the neorealist approach, the ideas, uh, the introductory part of international relations, what is international relations, how it is different from international politics, what is the scope of this paper, why do we study international relations, what is the relevance, what is the scope, what is the contemporary relevance, why do we need to study it in today's times, how it started, the evolution of the subject, etc., etc. So today I'm going to continue. We stopped, we started the world systems theory by Immanuel Wallstein. That's part of your syllabus, and we stopped in the midway. So today I'm going to continue this. Plus, I'm going to talk about the dependency school of thought. Okay, so we'll begin with the world systems theory, that is by Immanuel Wallstein. I assume that all of you are able to see the screen. Okay, so let me just begin with that. Okay, yeah, okay. So quickly, I'm reading the introduction part first, which we had done yesterday, but I'm going through it once more, so that the people who have joined today, the students who have just joined today, maybe they'll be able to they'll be able to follow the theory well. Okay, right. So introduction is that the world systems theory, which is proposed by Immanuel Wallstein, is basically part of the bigger school of thought, which is in total called the systems approach. The systems approach basically emerged from within the school of thought called general systems theory. Now, this whole idea of systems, studying the systems and then reaching the complexities or reaching the problems within, was not an exercise exclusive to social sciences. ऐसा नहीं था that only political scientists developed this kind of approach. The systems approach was a general framework which was developed by a biologist, and so in natural sciences also, other than social science, in natural sciences like bio and chemistry and physics, there is the applicability and usage of this systems approach which is seen. However, Immanuel Wallstein, basically a political scientist, he took up the systems approach and tried to develop a theory within international relations. That's why this name, and also uh, uh, the assumptions and the principles, and the way he looked at the world stage at that time became very, very important, because this was very fresh, this was very different from what already was there and was prevailing in the world arena. Okay, so I'm reading from the material. The systems approach became the hallmark of political science and international relations during the Cold War period. The complexities in Cold War period, such as the emergence of technologies of mass destruction, that is atom bombs, lethal weapons, everything was being developed because people feared that there would be another, war, probably, and that's why they wanted to be prepared. All the states wanted to be prepared. So a lot of technological advancements were taking place in terms of developing military acumen and strengthening one's states. So inventions in the fields of cybernetics, the digital world was getting open, computer science, etc. It was relatively new at that time. We are talking about 1945, so obviously not as developed as we see today. So all this emphasized the requirement of an integrated and comprehensive approach to address the complex problems unearthed during the Cold War period. See, Cold War period, the time when these two blocks were anti against each other, whole world was divided. This time, the situation was pretty different from the situation which was earlier witnessed during the World War I or post World War I. So post World War I scene was very different from post World War II, and post World War I, the realist approach and idealist approach, all these emerged. But this time, to deal with the complex problems, there was another new way and fresh way. Opinion or perspective was required to look at this situation. So this led to the development of general systems theory. Now thinkers thought that it is not enough to probably go with the rhetoric themes which were already stated in the liberal or the realist school of thought. They have to change their way of looking at things. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to control the situation and maintain peace and cooperation amongst the states. So general systems theory was developed during this time. The application of the systems approach was to various branches of natural sciences and social sciences, as I told you before. The systems approach in general believes that each and every system in the universe is interconnected and they exert influence over one another. Okay, all of us live through various systems. We have social systems like family, kinship, relationships. Then we have political systems like party systems, like we have electoral system. We have different systems which exist for us. Then we have economic systems. So we have different systems, and they all are interconnected and they exert influence over each other, all of them. Yet one thing to be clear of and one thing to remember is that all these systems are in themselves also very important. They have a certain role to play, yet they are interconnected with each other. Okay, so therefore we need to examine the dynamics of the system. Advancement where technology is introduced in different systems and they all are interconnected and they exert influence over each other, all of them. Yet one thing to be clear of and one thing to remember is that all these systems are in themselves also very important. They have a certain role to play, yet they are interconnected with each other. Okay, so therefore we need to examine the dynamics of the systems. We need to understand them in isolation. एक एक करके उनको समझने की जरूरत है to understand the whole working of the universe. Okay, so you cannot say that अगर मुझे I want to study international relations, for example, I will only focus on the foreign policy of the countries and then I will perhaps be able to understand international relations. No, that would not be enough, because you would have to understand the internal dynamics of a state, how it functions, what kind of political system it has, democracy hai, monarchy hai, ki democratic monarchy hai, etc. etc. So ये सब जानने के बाद ही perhaps you'll be able to understand. You know, the foreign policy is also it reflects the social and cultural, economic and political fabric of a country. So studying merely that probably will not give you an insight on international relations or the relationships that particular country shares with other countries or other states, but rather you have to go into other systems as well. So economic system will have some kind of, you know, if it has a capitalist system or not. So of course, the whole world is speaking the language of capitalism right now. It's very rare to find a country which is not adhered to the norms of it. But then there are different types of capitalism also. So which kind of capitalism does it have? So that would also have to say a lot about you know, its relationships with other countries and how it approaches the other countries. If it's aggressive capitalism or it's orthodox capitalism or it's a you know, democratic capitalism, welfare capitalism, etc., etc. All right. So therefore, we understand that systems approach, first time it kind of dissected the whole world and put them into various systems. And they said that we need to examine all these dynamics of these systems to understand the phenomenon of the universe. So the concept of system within systems theory कैसा है, इस पे हम लोग कल आए थे. So we're going to continue with that. All right. The system, अब ये थोड़ा सा और डिटेल में जाते हैं and we try to understand कि actually how does this work. The systems theory में system का क्या काम रहता है, why do we call it system? Okay. The systems approach is a framework to understand the phenomenon in terms of the wholeness of the system. Okay. So its self-organization, its relationships, its interactions amongst its various elements. So this approach emerged as a reductionist tradition in science. all right, which treats the natural as well as the social world as fragmented whole. They're part of that whole. They are recognized together. So thereby they're looking at all the elements to understand a particular phenomenon, right? In short, the systems approach looks at the dynamics within a system and its influence over other systems. Okay. So in international relations particularly, अब हम अपने subject पे आते हैं, a systems approach is used to understand a phenomenon by examining the functions of the international system. So ये जो वर्ल्ड स्टेज है, डिफरेंट स्टेट्स एग्जिस्ट करते हैं, एक दूसरे के साथ फॉरेन पॉलिसी के तहत संबंध बनाते हैं. सो all of them together, they are called a international system by the system theorist. ठीक है. Instead of analyzing only the developments कि इन्होंने मिलिट्री में इतना कर लिया या इनके यहाँ politically ऐसा हो गया, they started relying on the other aspects as well. Okay, so various elements, nation states or states in particular are one element. So we'll understand it better with the help of this example. Thus, a system can be defined as an interconnected set of elements that is coherently organized in a way that achieves something together, right? When they come together, all these different and disparate set of elements, when they come together, they together achieve something. Okay. Now, what are the four distinguishing features of a system? One is elements. One is interconnections, the kind of interconnections between them and how they are connected. There has to be one single point of connection between them. That function or purpose, what is the ultimate goal, what is the purpose? And fourth is a regulating force. There has to be some regulating force, some authority, some organizing idea, which has to be there so that to make it work. All right. So to understand this better, here we have an example where the international system is compared to a human body system called digestive system. So with the help of this example, we'll understand कि किस तरह ये चारों जो चीजें हैं, जो features हैं एक international system की, how do they work. So taking an example of our digestive system, first we said the distinguishing feature is elements. So we can imagine that elements within a digestive system are teeth, enzymes, stomach, intestines, all of these organs which have a role to play within a digestive system. Okay, so these are elements. Okay, so international में क्या होगा? The states, the non-state actors, economic organizations, the cultural organizations, different kinds of institutions, ठीक है, वो सारे जो हैं, they will be part of the international system. They will be called the elements. So elements in our digestive system are interconnected through a physical flow of food. There are interconnections. Within the digestive system, they are interconnected through a physical flow of food. There is food, and then it flows through the whole system. So here it would be perhaps the resources and the capital that flows through the whole system. Okay, the function or purpose of our digestive system is third feature is function or purpose. The function or purpose क्या है? To digest food and to extract nutrients from it. ठीक है, and to transfer those nutrients to another system of our body. So यहाँ पे international system में functions क्या है? To extract maximum profit or to gain certain benefit for their own nation state and then contribute to the international system as a whole so that it benefits everyone else also. And that's how development of one country would lead to development of another country. And last feature क्या है? Regulating force. So our digestive system is being regulated by the chemical signals. Okay, so here the regulations would be perhaps different organizations and the foreign policy that would regulate the functioning within the states and how they behave with each other. Thus, everything composed of interconnected elements has a function or purpose driven by regulating force, can be treated as a system. So similar fashion, human beings are also part of various number of systems in the society, and each system is interconnected, exerts its influence over the other systems in our body, which is quite similarly with the international system, because though it is made up of different elements and different systems exist, but all these systems together, they contribute in making the whole. Okay, so evolution. What is the evolution? How systems approach came into being? The systems approach is the intellectual child of the general systems theory. As I said, it's the bigger domain, which was introduced by the Austrian-born Canadian biologist Ludwig von Butler. This is only for your knowledge. Part of it you can produce it in the papers to introduce how systems theory came into existence. So Button's magnum opus, General Systems Theory, Foundation, Development, Application, is the name of the work, is the canonical text of the systems theory. During the time Wolfe was working on GST, the world was undergoing unprecedented incidents such as the Cold War rivalry was going on when he was writing. Okay, the Cold War rivalry between two antagonistic blocks. And who are these two antagonistic blocks? USSR versus USA. This is the two blocks at that time. And the threat of the weapons of mass destruction. This was the time when he's writing. Many people worried that the world was on the verge of destruction. At the same time, advancements in the field of science and technology, especially in cybernetics, indicated the possibility of applying knowledge for controlling human behavior and society. In 1949, James Cryer Miller, head of Department of Psychology of the University of Chicago, coined the term behavioral science. This was the time when behavioral revolution had advanced as the field of the integrated study of the biological, psychological, and social dimensions of human behavior. They said that considerably human behavior has a lot to say about, about the interactions which take place in the international arena. Then the focus of some sections in academia shifted to conduct interdisciplinary research on human behavior and social conflicts, right? So in order to achieve this goal, with the support and funding of Ford Foundation, the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences was established. So in California in 1954, several scholars who were interested in peace and building a comprehensive theory about human behavior and social conflicts were invited to associate with the center. Among scholars who played a major role in advancing general systems theory, along with Ludwig von were the economist and peace activist Kenneth Golding. These are the major names within this approach, okay? So along with Ludwig, it was Kenneth Golding, psychologist James Grier Miller, physiologist Ralph Gerard, and the mathematician Anatole Rapport. They established the Society for General Systems Research. Now it began to organize annual conference and to publish a general systems yearbooks instead, building on the general systems framework. Miller launched the journal and Golding initiated the Journal of Conflict Resolution. Thus, GST and behavioral science approach went hand in hand and integrated interdisciplinary social relations. The GST was developed as a discipline to formulate general principles of the system so that the branches of natural and social sciences can develop their own theories. You have to understand that all of them together, whether it's Golding or Rapport or Greer, all of them are working on a framework which can benefit both natural sciences and social sciences. It was not aiming at any particular subject. Okay, so GST seems to be appealing to all leading scholars of that time, and they adapted it to their concerned disciplines. Like Talcott Parsons applied it to sociology, Benefit to linguistics, Odom to ecology, and everyone. Now, systems approach to international relations. Systems approach to international relations marks a contrast to the traditional approach. Traditional approach means the realist or the idealist or the neo-realist, which focus on only the domestic factors, such as the ideology of nation state. For them, state was most important, and they were viewing everything from the perspective of their own state. Okay, so the character of the head of the state, the other internal matters that influence the behavior of the nation states. Only everything revolving around nation states was important so far. Now this thing opened up with coming of systems approach. Thus, the core of the systems approach to the study of international relations lies in the belief that the international system is an integrated whole, which is made of its structure and nation states. Other systems and other structures are also important other than the states, right? The study of international relations should be focused on the functions of the international system and its regulating force rather than examining the domestic factors only. Okay, clear here? Now let's start with the Immanuel Waldstein's world system story. Within the systems approach, what Immanuel Waldstein has to say. Waldstein sets forth his systems approach through the following books. These are the name of his books. You know, the modern world system. This you can find in any other book also. The name of the books I have just written here for your for the reference, and you can use you can take all the names in the paper or as many as you can. Just for the reference, how he has presented his approach and where he has presented. So the modern world system, then capitalist agriculture and the origins of European world economy in the 16th century, the capitalist world economy, the modern world system, volume 2, mercantilism and the consolidation of the European world economy. These are the so many books he has written on, and he studied political economy extensively. Okay, right. So according to Immanuel Waldstein, the present or the modern world system is a capitalist one. The first assumption is that he understands there are various economic systems. We have primitive systems, we have agrarian systems, we have capitalist systems. I'm sure you know the difference by now. So we are living in an era where most of the, almost the whole world, I can say, is part of this capitalist system. So this is first assumption that Immanuel Waldstein, the present or the modern world system, according to him, is a capitalist one, which emerged in Europe during the period between 1450 and 1650. This was the time. This is also known as the long 16th century. Clubbed together, it is, though of course 1450 is not 16th century, but this is in together, it's called the long 16th century. When we say long 16th century, we are actually talking about the evolution of the capitalist system in Europe, which later spread to other part of the world. Through the process of colonization, Upniveshwad, this system was extended to North and South America, then later on Asia and Africa, and thereby every region of the world was integrated into a capitalist system. So, for example, in India, we had an agrarian system, we had a primitive economy. But after we were colonized, France, Portugal, and then Britishers for the longest time, they came and then they introduced us to this capitalist system. And later we were also integrated into the world capitalist system. This is what Waldstein has observed. Therefore, the basic argument of Waldstein is that the world is not a set of independent or separate nation states. Instead, nation states are the part of a larger system, that is the world capitalist system. That's why he's saying world systems approach, which is set of relatively stable and political relationships. They have different kind of relationships within each other and being regulated by a global capital. Okay, it's not the capital of the country or capital of the economy which marks its development now, because it's the global capital which is responsible for it. Therefore, he suggests that focusing solely on the developments inside each nation state will not bring a clear picture of the developments in the world system. Rather, we have to examine the world system as a whole, its regulating force, the interactions of its 75 components or elements. So he's identified there are 75 elements within that system, and those 75 components we have to take into consideration together. Okay, and then only we'll be able to understand what's happening around us in the world. Okay, what are the features of Waldstein systems? Quickly, there are three features, three principles of the system. We'll quickly see that. First, A is that the composition of the modern world system, how he sees the composition. According to Wallstein, the key components that modern world system is made up of are economic zones, nation states, social classes, and status groups. These are the four things he identifies that a modern world system has. These four, it comprises of these four systems within. First is the economic zones. They are the classification of the geographical regions on the basis of division of labor. So economic zones are engaged in the production of primary commodities. They are basically the production ones, and the zones which focused on the manufacturing of most advanced commodities. So Wallstein holds that there are three economic zones on the basis of division of labor. As and how they contribute to the world economy, they are divided according to the division of labor. And he has divided them into three economic zones. Okay, so economic zone being one component is further divided into three economic zones. That's how he keeps the countries. First is called the, as you can see the highlighted part here, first is called the core, second is called the peripheral, and third is semi-peripheral. The core is the technologically advanced zone of the world, or known as the global north. Okay, all those countries which are basically the Western European countries and the United States, which specialize, the core specializes in the production of the most advanced commodities and featured by capital intensive production, the possession of cutting edge technologies, technological they are very advanced, and highly developed industries. Due to these factors, the core gets high profits from economic activities. Okay, so the core is represented by whom? Western European countries, the United States, Japan, okay, etc. So in sharp contrast, second is the peripheral. So basically when he's talking about this theory, he's giving out, he's drawing up this theory in terms of rings. Okay, he represents with the help of rings. First is a small circle which represents the cores, then a bigger circle which represents the peripheral, and then we have semi-peripheral countries. All of these three zones have connection with each other. Okay, so second is the sharp contrast, the peripheral countries. The peripheral is the least developed regions in the world. They are also known as the global south. The peripheral is engaged in the production of primary commodities. They were advanced commodities, these are primary commodities. The peripheral economic zone is relatively less technologically sophisticated, not very technologically advanced, and more labor intensive. People are there, so they can put on their labor. And then that of the core, of course, this core has less labor intensive work. It's more technological. So due to these reasons, the peripheral gets low profits from its producers. The peripheral is represented by most regions in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. Okay, all of them which are very less developed. Okay, the third zone is called the semi-peripheral. This is an area with a mixture of about half core and half peripheral. Okay, the example of semi-peripheral are the emerging economies like India, China, South Africa, Brazil. Those characterized by the attributes such as modern industries, cities, and large peasantry. Okay, so though they are developed, but not that developed as they can be put in the core category. Okay, so these are the first feature, that is economic zone. The second component of the world system is the nation state. The modern world system is politically organized into a sovereign and territorially bound nation states. All the states have their distinct boundaries. They are sovereign. They have authority, supreme authority over its citizens, and within their boundary, they have a certain system. So these are nation states. The third component of any advanced modern system is social classes. Now, in capitalist world system, social classes are formed on the basis of people's relationship to the means of production. Okay, those who own the means of production are the capitalists, and those who are deprived of it are workers. Okay, or the proletariat. This is also one classification where Marxist terms are used for bourgeois and proletariat, the capitalist and the working class, Punjipati work or Shramik work. Okay, so fourth component of the modern world system is the status groups. Now, the status groups, what are these? The social groupings which are based on solidarity, derives from cultural identification. Certain groups and organizations which draw heavily from the religion, language, race, or ethnicity, these kind of identities are seen. So they belong to this category. So these are the four components. Second feature of Wallstein's theory is nature of modern world system. First वो आपको components बता रहे हैं जिसमें 4 components हैं. Second, he's talking about the nature of world system. कैसे ये world system काम करता है? According to Wallstein, the modern world system is capitalist, that we have already discussed, that it is basically a capitalist system. And under this system, economic power rests in the hand of those who own the means of production. Okay, since the owners of the means of production, that is individuals हो सकते हैं, private corporations हो सकते हैं, state itself हो सकता है, state के various institutions हो सकते हैं, organizations हो सकते हैं, all of them are obsessed with the appropriation of maximum profits. सब ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा profit बनाना चाहते हैं. So the capitalist modern system is inherently exploitative, which makes the nature of the modern world system very very exploitative. Because जब आप profit बनाना चाहेंगे, profit making exercise में there would be a lot of compromises which you would make with your morals. So making it very exploitative. बहुत शोषण जाता है profit बनाने में. So the capitalist exploits the workers and the core exploits the peripheral states. Okay, so the core countries which are advanced, they exert certain kind of control economically over the peripheral countries, and thereby leading to extreme economic inequalities in the world economy. So the nature of world system, when Wallstein is understanding, he's finding that it is the capitalist system which is responsible for all the economic inequalities, the gap between different countries. Okay, third one for Wallstein would be regulating force in the modern world system. क्या है regulating force modern world system का? The regulating force in the modern world system is the global capital, okay, which organizes the economic activities across the world. Most of the Marxist thinkers, including world system theorists, consider the globalization as an economic transition in which the requirements of global capital are fulfilling through the implementation of neoliberal economic programs across the world. There are certain institutions, there are certain organizations, कुछ संस्थाएं हैं, कुछ व्यवस्थाएं हैं और कुछ ऐसे requirements हैं global capital की जो implement होने की वजह से they are exerting a certain type of control over the other countries and that's why they are the peripheral countries और उनकी development जो है वो restrain हो जाती है. So the core is exerting that influence. And how is it doing it? Because this is the era of globalization. So in a globalized country, when we say the world has shrunk, we don't mean merely traveling, but we also believe that there is a lot of interference in each other countries. And that's how core is also controlling the peripheral countries. कैसे? जैसे कि आपका IMF है, आपके transnational corporations हैं, all these are what they are doing is keeping a tab, keeping a control on the economy of that parent country. Okay, so in accordance with the interest of the global capital, they are exerting or exercising some sort of control on the peripheral countries. Another, for instance, the SAP, Structural Adjustment Programs. They are proposed by the IMF. They compel several nation states in the global south to roll back their welfare programs. Even if they want to undertake some welfare programs, SAP sometimes forces them, because it's not getting benefit out of those welfare programs, it forces them that they should spend or invest their capitals in something which would yield profit to the core countries. So by influencing the prerogative of the nation state to take the decisions regarding matters under its jurisdiction, the global capital has shown that it is able to challenge the concept of state sovereignty. Now हम कहते हैं that the states are sovereign. Sovereign का मतलब होता है that they only have the right to rule on themselves. But यहाँ ये जो question है sovereignty की, it comes under scanner because lot of times your political decisions, economic decisions are not taken by the system, by the political leaders, but rather it is regulated from outside. This is what Waldstein had observed at that time. Okay, these are the three assumptions, principles of Waldstein's theory. We have come to the last portion of this theory, which is the evaluation. Okay, let's quickly look at the evaluation. Now, world systems theory proposed by Immanuel Waldstein is also seen as a comprehensive version of dependency theory. Why would we say that? Because dependency theory जो है, हम remember we are in the last part of the debate. हमने जब introduction किया था, we understood that all these approaches are situated in some sort of debates. So ये third debate है where there is a paradigm shift. Liberals से Marxist पे आए हैं. इस समय का time था when Marxist writing was developing, and it understood that the more advanced countries or the moneyed countries, the affluent ones, have created such certain kind of dependency of these less developed countries. Now they are dependent on these core countries for their own development. This is the crux of dependency theory, that the peripheral countries are eternally dependent by means of certain policies. They are made eternally dependent on the core countries for their development, and which is deterrent to the development of the country, peripheral countries. So dependency theory यही कहती है how to end this dependence, how to make the peripheral countries self-sufficient. That is the lookout. That's the theory. So in contrast to the moderate and radical dependency theorists who limit their study to the economic relations between core and periphery, ये जो core and periphery के जो studies हैं, basically ये dependency school of thought से आते हैं, because Immanuel Waldstein also divided them into core countries and periphery countries and semi-periphery countries. Somewhere he's clubbed into the part of that dependency school. However, purely he doesn't fall in the dependency school as such. He's part of the systems approach. Okay, so world system theory is focused on a broader geographical framework. Okay, it draws on the Lenin's understanding of imperialism. अगर आपने अपने फर्स्ट सेमेस्टर में लेनिन किया होगा, then Lenin's understanding of imperialism is that all the countries would at one point of time would want to expand, and by expanding they want to expand their economic zones as well, and that's how they become exploitative, and European benefits from the less developed countries, less advanced countries. So world systems theory holds that the world as it is today can be understood only in the context of development of global capitalism. So everything the idea is that Waldstein is looking at the system as a whole. He's not saying that there's an independent existence of any country, but rather they are connected through global economic exchanges. So it's a global capitalism. There is nothing called sovereignty or exclusive capitalism which can be seen within the country. Okay. So according to Waldstein, this capitalist world economy is categorized by the production for the market to gain the maximum profit. That's how capitalism works, maximizing profit. That's the idea, which leads to unequal exchanges, the relations between the core and peripheral states. Obviously, when we have we understand that in order to generate more and more profit, the core is initiating or exerting certain kind of control on the peripheral state that would lead to unequal exchange relationships between them. Further, this global capital has generated a hierarchical structure. There is a hierarchy, okay, which determines the position of each state within the world economy. As I told you, because they are clubbed into different groups, they have a certain hierarchy. Pehle core aata hai, then periphery, and then semi-periphery. Explains their nature of relationship also. Okay, so according to world system theorists, the possibility of changing position in the core and semi-periphery or periphery hierarchy is very rare. It's rare, but it's not impossible though. that maybe a periphery country can slip into the core countries, or the semi-periphery country will become periphery soon, and or maybe a core soon, this kind of change. So this core, periphery and semi-periphery remains the enduring features of a capitalist world economy, and therefore the world system theory is a critique of liberal and modernization theories. Earlier, everything was built on the liberal thinking, and now this was a paradigm shift and Marxist thinking emerged. So world systems theory further holds that the semi-periphery states divide the periphery and make it a unified opposition against the core, a difficult task. The core maintains its hegemony due to the divisions within the semi-periphery and periphery camps. Because there are small economic developments taking place in some countries, they are clubbed under semi-periphery. Otherwise, basically, they are also periphery only. But this semi-periphery divide makes it easier for the core to maintain its control. The more they are divided, it's easier for them to control. If they are united, probably it would be difficult for the core to maintain its rule. So, however, the world systems theory argues the contradictions within the capitalist global economy will lead eventually to the decline of capitalism and its replacement by socialism. Having its faith in Marxist paradigm, they believe that eventually there would be a decline of capitalism and it will be replaced by socialism, where there will be more equality, economic equality, particularly between these core, periphery and semi-periphery countries, because there will be less dominance of one particular and equal exchanges will take place. Okay, all right, so this completes our exercise into world systems theory, and I'm going to take up the dependency school of thought. You have to give me 1 minute before I share my other screen with you. Okay, just 1 second. All right, so welcome back, and now we are going to start with the other approach, and as you can see my screen now. Okay, so it's one very important approach we are going to discuss with you today. It's the dependency school of thought. The dependency theory emerged in Latin America during the second half of the 1950s as a critique of liberal theories of socio-economic and political development. Okay, this is the introduction of dependency theory. It emerged a bit late on the world stage. It is not as old the liberal stories or realist theories. It's a relatively new one. Dependency theory can be defined as an explanation of the economic backwardness of a nation state due to the external influence. Okay, Teotonio dos Santos, one of the major proponents of dependency theory, defines it as a historical condition which shapes the structure of the world economy in favor of some countries, thereby adversely affecting the development of others. So development of some countries leads to development or underdevelopment of others. This is what dependency theorists, they analyze. So dependency is basically a situation in which the economy of a country is conditioned by the development and expansion of the economy of another country. Okay, dependency theory seeks to understand and explain the reasons for this persistent economic backwardness and underdevelopment of the countries in the global south, and sets forth suggestions to resolve this problem. You have to understand that dependency is a framework. It is not only one particular theory, but it's a set of opinions, different kinds of opinions, which emerged as a reaction to the economic situation in the world at that time. What was the economic situation? All these advanced or technologically advanced countries, or the capitalist countries, were reaping more and more benefit out of the exploiting the small economies like Latin American states or the African states, and making them more and more dependent on these advanced nations. So dependency thinkers tried to look into the possibility that basically, can this dependency ever be ended? And if it is not ended, then these countries, especially the Latin American countries, because all the dependency thinkers, the school of thought is basically contributed by Latin American thinkers, the political scientists of Latin America. They are writing, keeping in mind and studying and analyzing Latin American countries in particular. So what they are witnessing is that as much as the advanced nations are expanding and economically they're booming, this is bringing more and more underdevelopment to them. Okay, they want to understand and also explain the reasons that this kind of economic backwardness, why is it not ending? Even if the other nations, the core nations in particular, they are developing. But here, as a result, there is no development, but rather underdevelopment which is taking place. So it's a take of the global south. It's the global south perspective against the global north. Okay, and then further, after analyzing, they put forth certain suggestions how to resolve this problem. Okay, all right. So as a concept, the term dependency is widely used in international relations to explain the dominant dependent structure of the relations. That's why they are also sometimes part of the structural theories, that they try to explain there is a structure where certain countries are dominant countries, those who dominate, and certain countries who are dependent. because their economy is not that developed or advanced, so they have to depend on these countries for their development, further development. So this dominant dependent structure of relations both along and between the nation states. However, as a school of thought, dependency theory seeks to explain the causes of economic development and underdevelopment. Evolving in Latin America during the 1960s, the dependency theory later found favor in some writings about Asia and Africa. But basically, it's Latin American writings. The dependency theory particularly became very influential in Latin America, where it exerted considerable influence on government policies in the region. With contributions, now these are the important names, with contributions from varied scholars like Wal Prebisch, Furtado, Osvaldo Sanquil, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, Falato, Teutonio dos Santos, and Marini. Latin America contributed more than any other region to the development of underdevelopment theory. The dependency theory is also called the development of underdevelopment theory, okay, which is the dependency approach, obviously. This probably explains why underdevelopment theory is largely associated with Latin America and regarded as Latin America's major contribution to the social sciences. Okay. Apart from Latin America, the dependency theory has had varying degrees of influence in other regions like Asia, Africa, or the Caribbean regions. Even though the dependency approach has not been very influential in countries like India, it has nonetheless enjoyed a very visible presence. Indian Marxist scholars like Dadabhai Naoroji and M.N. Roy, they did contribute and considerably towards the development of dependency perspective. However, the appeal of the dependency theory in India in terms of its impact on the policy circles is not at all comparable to that of the Latin American countries. The situation in Africa, however, has been far better than that of India. It became quite influential in policy circles in Africa under the influence of the Council for the Development of Economic and Social Research in Africa. CODESERIA, the umbrella social science organization of Africa, in due course of time became a key center for the leaders of the more radical nationalist and liberation movements from Angola, Mozambique, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Namibia, all of whom had their own distinct theories of underdevelopment, which emanated from their experiences of exploitative imperialism. The popularity of the dependency in this part of the world can be gauged from the fact that Julius Nyerere, president of Tanzania, personally popularized it so much so that it became part of the official ideology in independent Mozambique and Angola. Okay, there are different strands within this dependency theory. There is no one coherent set of thoughts. So dependency is not a single unified theory, rather it's a set of theories, or rather framework to study and continued economic dependence and underdevelopment in some countries or regions, and its social, cultural, economic, and foreign policy fallouts. Why they are like that, okay? This is the reason they are studying. So dependency scholars are divided into various number of camps. But basically, what we are going to see here is two different versions. One is the moderate version, which is represented by Wal Prebisch, and the radical or the Marxist-Leninist version. This is propagated by Andre Gunnar Frank. So moderate version is, you can see in the works of Wal Prebisch, it played a major role in generating the dependency theory. Wal Prebisch was an Argentine economist, and during his illustrious career as a professor of economics and Director General of Argentine Central Bank, he founded the ECLA, Economic Commission for Latin America. He was the head of it also, and the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNTAC. During his tenure as the executive secretary of ECLA, Prebisch brought out a groundbreaking study which was titled The Economic Development of Latin America and Its Principal Problems. That was in 1950, which was an inquiry into the economic backwardness of Latin American countries. According to Prebisch, it is the adverse terms of trade with the developed countries, which has historically deteriorated the economic condition of Latin American countries. Now, this terms of trade is the ratio between a country's export prices and its import prices. So while Latin American countries are the producers of primary commodities, they export it to the industrially advanced countries. These primary commodities are processed and transformed into the finished products in the industrially advanced countries. These finished products are then exported back to the developing countries, including that of the Latin American region. So in other words, countries export their primary commodities at cheaper prices and import finished products at higher prices, and this adversely affects their economy. This is very similar to what happened to us during the Britishers' time also, and that's how M.N. Roy and Dadabhai Naoroji also talked about the drain theory, how all our raw material and primary commodities are drained out of the country, and then as a finished good, they are imported at a higher price. So on the basis of his empirical study conducted with Hans Wolf Singer, Prebisch set forth a Singer trade thesis. This was PST, the Prebisch Singer trade thesis. All right, so this is a little bit about that thesis, that how it suggests that economies of the producers of primary commodities, they are declining day by day due to the increasing trade deficit with the producers of the finished products. In other words, the economic gap between producers of primary commodities and the producers of finished products enhances in tandem with their increasing economic ties. Thus, the Prebisch-Singer terms of trade thesis, PST, laid foundation for the dependency theory. Prebisch challenged the theory of comparative advantage and the liberal economist view that the developing countries should specialize in the production of primary commodities in order to benefit from free trade. Now, he challenged the whole idea of free trade or laissez-faire economy, which was prevalent at that time. It was very much under the fashion under the liberal influence. So Prebisch introduced a structuralist approach to the study of global economy, which was based on the binary opposition of development, underdevelopment, or core periphery understanding, which we have already discussed above. In other words, his study was focused on the inherently asymmetric relationship, unequal relationship between the developed and the developing countries. Unlike liberal theories, Prebisch approach was examining the theme of development and underdevelopment from the experience of the countries in the global south. As I told you, that it's a perspective of the global south against the global north. So having set forth the reasons for economic backwardness in Latin America, Prebisch then set forth a number of recommendations also. And one such recommendation was import substitution industrialization, ISI. Import substitution industrialization is a trade policy that seeks to reduce imports by promoting industries at a domestic level. Very similarly, it happened in the Nehruvian era in India also, where this ISI was emphasized so that we become self-sufficient, and then probably that self-sufficiency would lead to lesser imports. Production can be controlled here, and this would give us, give our economy a little push. All right. So trade deficit perhaps can be lessened. This is what Prebisch also aimed at. So promotion of local industries is definitely talked about and supported, so that to scale up economic growth. All right. In the 50s and 60s, Indians and especially Nehru also gave out certain kind of similar ideas for India, how to end this. Not literally, he did not use the word dependency, but he wanted our economy to move in a certain direction where we can reap the benefits of the global capitalist structure. However, there were certain hurdles to a successful implementation of these recommendations. The first was that comparatively, there are smaller markets in Latin American countries which were not enough to support the economies of scale and keep the prices low because the markets are relatively small. The second issue was related to the difficulties in transforming Latin America from agrarian economy to the industrial nations because the technology is not so sound. The third problem is that the ISI caused more dependency on import of capital and heavy machinery, which is needed for industrialization. See, these countries, the Latin American countries, Asian countries, and African countries, at that point of time, also, we are talking about the era of 50s and 60s, they were still developing. They were not completely industrialized, not as advanced in technology as the core countries of the global south. So that is why implementing all this would have been a difficulty. This is Raoul Prebisch analysis, and now we will do the Andre Gunnar Frank's analysis, which is the radical version of dependency. A.G. Frank, as he was known, was very much influenced by the Marxist writings of his times, and that's why this version is also called the radical version. Radical dependency theory is built upon Marxism and Lenin's understanding of imperialism. So A.G. Frank, James Coxfrot, and Dale Johnson, they are considered to be radical dependence theories. The radical dependency theorists argue that the motive force behind the dependency relationship is the global capitalism. Okay, so the developed countries find markets for their finished goods in developing countries. In addition to that, the developed countries also treat developing countries as the destination for investment. When developing countries borrow capital from developed countries, the loan repayments deteriorate their economy, right? So radical dependency theorists hold that the underdevelopment of the countries in the global south is a historical product. Here, underdevelopment is a condition that differs from undeveloped. Undeveloped is a condition that is lack of development, and underdevelopment is a result of exploitation by another country. Okay, when you are not developed, you are undeveloped. But underdevelopment is when you are pushed towards undevelopment. Okay, and this is what A.G. Frank is explaining, that underdevelopment of these countries is taking place because more and more they are exploited, and there is no chance of development here. And it is the result of the exploitation by other countries. So centuries of colonialism, exploitation, and socio-economic and political restructuring of colonies by the imperial powers have transformed the erstwhile colonies into peripheries, and their former masters into the center of the core countries. As a result, the countries in the periphery have to depend on the core for capital, for technology, and also for the finished goods. In other words, centuries of colonialism has transformed developing countries into the suppliers of primary commodities, cheap labor, and the repositories of capital, technologies, and finished goods. All right. Radical dependency theorists hold that the rigid international division of labor enforced by the capitalist system is responsible for this underdevelopment in some parts of the world. Here, periphery states are tasked with the supply of primary commodities. The most striking point is that what periphery states have to supply and what they have to receive in the form of capital and technology are determined by the economic interests of the core. They can't decide on their own. Here, the periphery states do not have any say or control over the matters related to their own development. In such a condition, the governments in the core and the periphery states try to satisfy the interest of the bourgeoisie, that is the affluent. This control of bourgeoisie over the core and periphery is the characteristic of the highest stage of capitalism or imperialism, where the world is divided into these two different classes. So in the process, the periphery countries also experience loss of sovereignty because they don't have a decision-making power, because the decision-making power shifts to the core. Raw material producers become an appendage to the economies of the core. What one finds is not a genuine national capitalism in Latin America, rather it is a capitalism that is dependent. Capitalism to hai, industrialization to hai, but it is of a dependent nature because they don't want them to be independent. Agar wo independent ho gaye, then the core countries will not have more hands in the form of these dependent countries. Unka jo profit hai, wo ruk jayega. So this dependent capitalism is the result of all these processes and decisions which are made in the core economies. So they make the decisions and they impose it on these peripheral countries, making them dependent. So radical dependency theorists argue that the countries in the global south cannot follow the Western path to development because the core countries or the Western countries would never let them grow. The long history of colonialism and the restructuring of socio-political and economic system in the colonies created an asymmetrical structure of relations between the core and the periphery states. This has made the core as the producers of the finished products and the peripheral states as the suppliers of primary commodities. Moreover, the terms of trade favors the core at the expense of periphery, which further widens inequalities between the core and the periphery. Radical dependency theorists hold that the sheer exploitation in the form of exchange between the primary commodities and the finished products will only deteriorate the vulnerable condition of the developing countries. There is so much gap that the gap cannot be bridged unless we break this relationship. In other words, this unequal exchange advances the development of underdevelopment. So it's a vicious circle. घूम फिर के हम बार वहीं जाते हैं, and this leads to underdevelopment of all our countries if we don't break this chain. According to the radical dependency theorists, such as Frank particularly, underdevelopment is this condition which is created by the exploitation of developing countries. So they decide उनको क्या चाहिए, कितना चाहिए, कैसे चाहिए, and that is followed by these developing countries, and that's how exploitation happens. So a socialist revolution is the only way to break away from this exploitative and dependent relationship. That's the solution Frank has to offer, since he's very much influenced by the Marxian doctrine. He thinks that when we have socialism, because socialism allows everyone to become equal partner at the world stage or in the world economy, then socialism perhaps will be the only solution whereby this gap can be lessened, it can be bridged. Okay, this is what Frank's analysis is. The major concepts, we'll quickly look into it. I'll not go into the details because we have already done it. Just a quick thing. There are 5 concepts within the dependency theory that Frank has given. One is the dependency as the result of a historical process. He's talking about all the colonial experience of these developing institutions and how the capitalist powers are controlling the socio-economic, cultural, all the kind of institutions in the colonies, and then integrating them into the economies and maximizing the profit. So it's a result of historical. It's not only after independence they're experiencing. From time immemorial, when they were colonized by these capitalist power, they have been experiencing this kind of an exploitation which has not ceased to exist. Okay, so even after independence, this kind of exchange, unequal exchange between these two states are seen. Okay, the second principle is the core, periphery, semi-periphery, and enclave economy. Now, all the dependency thinkers, they will categorize the economies into 2 broad categories, core and periphery, which was already discussed, core being the Europe, US, and Japan, and which in some theories they're also called the center or the metropolitan state. And then we have periphery, which is the Africa, Asia, South Asia, Latin American countries, which is also called the global south, and sometimes the satellite countries. In between, people like Frank, those who have introduced Wallstein, those who have introduced the intermediate position, that is the semi-peripheral states. Nobody else talks about the semi-peripheral division other than Wallstein. He puts India, China, and emerging economies like Brazil and South Africa into these category, whereby they are experiencing some kind of profit. They are shifting, and maybe within time we may see that they may slip to the other side. They may become a core economy in some time. Okay, and the fourth type of economy is enclave economy. That is a territory within a periphery. So within a periphery, like for example, within India, we have certain zones in which foreign capital is invested for extracting raw materials such as minerals, oils, plantations like tea and coffee. So even though the extractions in the enclave economies provide some small jobs to some group of population, but it does not improve the economic condition of periphery. It makes it more stagnant. All right. So natural resources get depleted. Meanwhile, they are getting advantage of having some small group of jobs. But as we talk about development, it doesn't happen, but rather they suffer from lack of development here. Okay, only submitting to the choices made by the core countries. So these are the 4 different type of categories of economies. Then the third principle is dependency theory as a critique of liberal theories. Now we have understood in detail that how dependency theory emerges as a critique of liberal theories. Earlier, the liberal theories and people like Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Jean Baptiste, Jeremy Bentham, they all talked about how laissez-faire or the open economy, free trade economy would always benefit all the countries, giving them the same amount of control and equality in the economic exchanges. However, it doesn't happen when we look at the colonies, especially the colonies which were freed recently. They don't become equal, but rather they become subservient to the rules and regulations which are already made by these 4 countries. Okay, and later we also see that these the 2 groups of bourgeois and proletariat, they exist in terms of these 2 different economic zones, and not the desirable condition is achieved by these less advanced economies. Okay, so basically dependency grew against the liberal ideas of free trade, and the design of free trade does not give any kind of advantage to the Latin American, Asian, or African countries. That's what dependency school of thought is saying. The fourth one is that it's a critique of modernization theory. Now, modernization theory is a perspective that the less developed countries can achieve development through accelerating economic growth and replacing the traditional values and socio-political and economic systems with that of the developing countries. Modernization theory equates development with mass industrialization, the higher level of economic growth, and the liberal democratic values. It's the W. Rostow, a name of an American economist who popularized the whole idea of modernization theory, who played a major role in shaping US foreign policy towards Latin America in 1960s. So when he furnished this kind of an idea, obviously the reaction from Latin American thinkers emerged in the shape of dependency thinking. So according to Rostow, all countries have to undergo 4 stages of economic development to achieve the status of a developed countries. First there is a takeoff, where they are traditional and first stage is traditional, where they are primitive economy. Second is the takeoff, where they start learning how capitalism works and little bit industrialization comes to them. Third is a stage of technological advancement, where technology is introduced. With the help of technology, they try to become modern. And the fourth stage will be the stage which exhibits higher economic growth, a very good lifestyle, and you gradually become a developed country. That's the fourth stage a country has to undergo to become modernized or industrialized, or let's say a developed country in its own. This is the theory which Rostow gives, that this is the 4 stages which a country undergoes. All the countries have to undergo through this. Dependency theorists hold that modernization theory is very ethnocentric, very westernized. They have never realized how the cultural context of other parts of the world. Okay, every country has their own socio-cultural context, and Rostow is writing keeping in mind only the European countries or the Western countries first. And second, the proponents of modernization, they fail to examine the impact of colonization on former colonies. 200-400 साल तक की colonization obviously has a direct impact on the behavior of the people of that colony also, which Rostow fails to take into consideration. और ज़रूरी नहीं है that all the countries will go through the same kind of stages. So one size that fits all, that kind of theory Rostow is giving, which definitely does not go well with the dependency thinkers, because they think that the reasons for underdevelopment in these peripheral countries is much different from the kind of underdevelopment we have seen in the European countries in the past. So these are not comparable at all. The last assumption would be, okay, yeah, I think we have to stop here. And there are just 2 more things we'll continue tomorrow. Sorry, now we are going to meet on Monday, and we'll be starting with the next module, and I'll be just finishing off this theoretical thing, and we'll start with the Cold War and the post-Cold War politics on Monday. And so for today, this is what